The storm had already passed when I arrived, but it had left the world in pieces. The road to the village was a narrow ribbon of mud and broken branches, and my car barely made it through. I remember thinking that it looked as if the land itself had exhaled after holding its breath too long. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth, dust, and something faintly metallic. The smell of roofs torn open and hearts split in half. I hadn't been back here in 12 years, not since the last argument. Not since I'd walked out of my grandmother's house and told her that love built on guilt wasn't love at all. The words still haunted me. They didn't sound like something a granddaughter should have said. When I reached the end of the dirt road, I saw what used to be her house. Or rather, what was left of it. Half the roof had caved in. One of the walls had collapsed completely, revealing a crooked skeleton of wood and stone. The chimney leaned as if bowing to the wind that had finally won. 2 men from the village were standing by the gate, their faces pale and solemn. One of them, old Thomas, the postman who had once brought me sweets in his pocket, recognized me first. "Lucia," he said, squinting against the morning light. "I didn't think you'd come back." His voice was kind, but behind it, I heard what he didn't say. Not after all this time. Not after how things ended. "I came as soon as I heard," I replied. My own voice sounded foreign in my ears, quieter than I remembered. "Is she—" He nodded slowly. "We found her this morning. The roof gave in sometime during the night. She must have been sitting by the stove when it happened." I looked toward the ruins. The stove, that old cast-iron monster she used to cook everything on, was still standing. Blackened but unbroken, like a monument to her stubbornness. "She didn't suffer," Thomas added softly. "It was quick." The other man cleared his throat. "There's something else," he said. "When we found her, she was holding a letter." My heart stopped for a moment. "A letter?" he nodded. "We thought it might be for you." He handed it to me. An envelope, slightly singed at the edges, the paper brittle and yellow. My name was written in her handwriting, the same careful loops I used to watch her write grocery lists with. Lucia. Just that. No surname. Just Lucia. Like a prayer whispered between breaths. I held it as if it might burn me. Inside the ruins, everything smelled of smoke and rain. The walls that had once held laughter and scolding and lullabies were now cracked open to the sky. A teacup still sat on the table, half full. The liquid turned cold and gray. A framed photograph, me at 7 years old, missing 2 front teeth, lay face down in the mud. I didn't cry. Not yet. The grief was too large to fit through my throat. I stepped carefully through the debris until I reached the chair beside the stove. It was there she'd been found. Thomas had already told me. The blanket she always kept over her knees still clung to the legs of the chair, soaked through but intact, and on the floor beside it, where her hand must have fallen, was another letter, folded once, sealed with the same old-fashioned wax stamp she used on birthdays and Christmases. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't addressed to anyone. I picked it up. The wax broke easily, crumbling between my fingers. The paper inside was fragile. The ink faded but legible. The first line made my knees give out. "If anyone finds this house, please tell my granddaughter I never stopped waiting." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. The letter went on, but I couldn't read it yet. The storm outside had gone silent, but inside me, another one had begun. I sat there for a long time, in the ruins, in the quiet, listening to the dripping water and the faint echo of the past moving through the wreckage like a ghost. I remembered her voice from the last time we spoke. The argument had been about my mother, her daughter, and the secrets she never shared. "You think I'm cruel," she had said. "But one day, you'll see that silence was the only kindness I had left." I hadn't believed her then. I think I do now. By noon, the rescue team came with stretchers and tarps. They asked if I wanted to see her, to say goodbye before they took her away. I hesitated. I didn't know if I could. But then I thought of all the mornings she had woken before dawn to make me tea. All the nights she'd kept the light on waiting for a daughter who never came home. And I realized I owed her that much. They lifted the last beam from the corner of the room, and there she was. Her hand still clutched the remains of the letter. Her fingers curled around it like a secret she'd refused to let go. Her face was calm, almost peaceful. For a moment, I thought she was only asleep. I knelt beside her and whispered, "I'm sorry." The words cracked as they left me. I came back too late, and maybe I imagined it. But I could have sworn the wind outside softened then, the rain easing into a hush, as if forgiving me in her place. That night, I stayed in what was left of the house. I lit a candle and placed it on the windowsill, the way she used to whenever someone was missing. I opened the letter again. The words trembled in my hands, the ink smudged by her fading strength. "Lucia, my little light, if this reaches you, it means the house has fallen, but maybe the truth will finally stand. What I never told you, what your mother never could, it's written here, not to wound you, but to free you." I folded it again, too afraid to read more. Not yet. Some truth needed daylight. The candle burned low. The house creaked, as if breathing. Outside, the rain began again, softer this time, almost like a lullaby. And for the first time since I left this place, I didn't feel like a stranger. I felt like a granddaughter coming home to finish a story that had been waiting for her all along. Morning came thin and gray, the kind of light that doesn't announce itself so much as apologize for being late. I woke on the floorboards where I'd slept, wrapped in an old quilt that had somehow survived the storm with more dignity than the walls. The candle on the windowsill had burned down to a puddle of wax, as if it too had kept vigil. For a full minute I lay still, listening. To the cicadas resuming their stubborn chorus, to water ticking from a broken gutter, to the faint hush of wind combing through the walnut tree. The house was quieter but not empty. It made the small sounds of a body deciding it could keep going. Wood settling, damp plaster sighing, a nail somewhere easing its grip and then thinking better of it. I had once believed houses were just containers for people. Now I understood they learned our breathing and tried to keep time. I propped myself up and unfolded my grandmother's letter with careful fingers, the paper thin as onion skin and softer than I remembered last night. My name greeted me again in her writing. Lucia, a shape I hadn't seen in 12 years and could still trace by heart. When you were little, you told me the walls were shy. You said they turned their faces away when we cried and came back when we laughed. I told you some houses are shy and some are proud. Ours was both. It was built by a man who spoke in orders and kept his heart elsewhere, then mended by a woman who patched the air with bread and lullabies. I am not the mender people think I am. I have dropped more stitches than I admit. I stopped and swallowed. I could see her sitting at the kitchen table, elbows on the oilcloth, telling me serious things in the same voice she used to ask if I wanted honey. I am not the mender people think I am. That sentence lay on my tongue like an unripe plum. I wanted to fight it and to agree with it at the same time. I read on. You have asked me many times about your mother. The last time, we used anger instead of words. I told myself I was protecting you. Perhaps I was protecting a version of myself that could live with choice. I chose silence because the town is a net. Throw one truth and it will drag up every old bone from the river. But the river is low now, and what's hidden there is catching sun. I will not let you learn about us from anyone else. Outside, someone called to a dog. The sound floated in like a name almost remembered. I stood and moved to the doorway of the kitchen, framed by what the storm had spared. I could almost set the room back together with memory. The enamel bowl where she whisked eggs, the flour tin that never closed right, the broom leaning in the corner like a thin ant who'd overstayed. Most of all, the stove, black iron, deep-lidded, breathing out warmth that smelled of thyme and linen, and the first kind of safety I ever knew. I closed my eyes, and a morning from long ago opened. I am 8, knees dusty, hair in 2 lopsided braids because I had insisted on doing them myself. She is humming something wordless, the sound moving as easily as her hands. She taps the counter twice to get my attention. Never raises her voice, never needs to, and slides the bowl toward me. "Count to 30 while you stir," she says. "But make the numbers small." I ask what small numbers are. She smiles without looking up. "Numbers that don't bump the eggs." We eat with the back door open. Midges gather, then lose interest. I ask, "Why does the house smell like rain when it isn't raining?" She says, "Because it remembers." When I tell her that's silly, the smile returns, soft and infuriating. "So do you," she says, and wipes a crumb from my chin like she's finishing a sentence. In those days, every correction arrived dressed as tenderness. I didn't yet understand how much skill that took. Back in the present, my eyes found the letter again, as if it were a candle I had set down in the dark. "Your mother did not run away from you, little light. She ran toward herself and never made it back. She was restless even in sleep. When the wind rose, she would sit up and look at the window as though it were a train timetable. I mistook that for selfishness. It was hunger. Some hungers are born in the bone." A soft ache bloomed under my ribs, the old sore place that had taught me how to speak with my jaw set. "So you kept her from me," I said into the room. The words didn't echo. They lay down at my feet like tired dogs. "There was more in the letter. There had to be. I told you she left us on a Tuesday. That is true. What I didn't tell you is what she left to me to carry. A letter with no address, and a promise with no end. She asked me to give you the truth when you were old enough to forgive me for taking so long. I was waiting for the right hour. Houses know about hours. They keep them even when we don't. The storm has taken the roof and given me the hour." I folded the page once and held it to my chest. "The truth," I whispered. Somewhere a bird scolded me for saying it out loud. I went to the sink out of habit, turned the tap, and watched brown water lurch, clear, and then run clean. I filled a cup and drank greedily, letting the cold push the ache into a quieter corner. On the far counter, a loaf pan sat skewed, as if a recipe had been interrupted mid-verb. I could see her there yesterday, apron wrinkled, reading glasses low, and then the roof gave. I braced my palms against the wood and breathed. The air had that after-sob clarity, when the face is still wet but the heart has made a small agreement to keep beating. I took the letter to the doorway of what had been the front room and sat on the threshold. The garden beyond was a mess of branches and shingles. The walnut tree had dropped a large limb that now lay like a tired shoulder across the path. In the broken light, a patch of herbs survived. The stubborn squad, rosemary, sage, oregano, losing the argument it always lost to the others. I could hear her voice naming them the way she named saints. Not for worship, but for companionship. "You don't cook alone," she'd say. "You invite what remembers." I turned the page. "The letter you found beside me is for you. But the other one, the one I meant to send and never did, is for him. If the rescue men found it too, then perhaps there is still a post somewhere for old sins. Your father is not the man whose name you learned in school. He is a man whose name this town would not allow me to say. He came here as a technician for the dam project, and he left like all storms leave, talking about the sky as if it owed him a promise. He did not know about you. I did not let him. Before you judge me, I ask you to look at the doorframe. On the right side, knee-high, under the paint." I set the letter down, heart hammering in the new way. The one that means you have been given an instruction and are afraid it will work. I limped. When had I started limping? To the doorframe between kitchen and hall, and crouched. The paint was a palimpsest, layers of eggshell white over history. I slid a fingernail under a loose flake and lifted gently until the shape beneath surfaced. Short lines, evenly spaced, small dates written in pencil, my heights, a life measured in graphite, every notch a small boast. And there, beneath a layer thicker than the rest, another set of marks. Their start lower, their reach shorter, with a different hand in the numbers. I scraped a little more and saw a tiny heart drawn next to one date. Emploi, the question mark. A joke, or a refusal to carve what couldn't be promised. I pressed my forehead to the wood and let the splinters map my skin. You kept 2 histories, I said. One you showed me when we argued. One you hid so we wouldn't have to. I didn't know whether to thank her or scold her or both. Love is an untidy grammar. You conjugate it in real time. Back to the letter. I have told you little and much. The much is this. You were not a mistake, Lucia. You were a weather change. I tried to build a climate you could grow in. Sometimes I mistook walls for shelter. The small is this. Under the 3rd floorboard by the stove, there is a tin. If the house let you get here, it will let you have it. In the tin is the rest of what I owe you. If the tin is gone, then believe the wind needed it more than you do. For once, I didn't hesitate. I found the old coal shovel behind the stove, pried at the seam of the floorboards until one lifted with a sigh that sounded almost relieved. The space beneath smelled like dry wheat. My fingers found the edge of a tin, the kind that once held cookies and then held every spare thing a life accumulates. I pulled it up and set it on the table as if it were a sleeping animal. The lid resisted and then gave. Inside, a braid of hair tied with blue thread. A train ticket stub so faded, it only kept the idea of a destination. A photo of my mother at 17, chin lifted, eyes daring the sun to try its worst. And another letter, smaller, with an old brown stain at the corner that might have been tea and might have been time. I opened the smaller letter first. The handwriting wasn't my grandmother's. It was sharper, more certain, the kind of script that writes on forms and does not apologize. If I do not come back, it is not because I forgot you. It is because I remembered myself. Do not let her tell you I ran away from love. I am running toward the part of me that can come back and stay. If I fail, let my girl know the song I meant to teach her is the one she already hums when she is pretending not to be scared. The words are not important. The humming is. I didn't realize I'd started humming until I heard it catch in my throat. A small sound, half lullaby, half the drone of a kettle that means company. I reached for the photo and held my mother's gaze until it stopped being a picture and started being a mirror, tilted slightly toward night. I returned to my grandmother's letter for the last lines on the page. If I have earned even a corner of your forgiveness, use it first on yourself. Come back to this house only if you want to, not because anyone is watching. The neighbors will bring casseroles and opinions. Take the food and leave the rest. I have made arrangements with Thomas for the papers. He will know what is fair. If the roof stands again, it will be because you choose to hear the shy parts when they speak. They will ask for bread and for light. Give them both. The word bread landed with the weight of a chore and the grace of a benediction. I closed the letter and watched dust skate through a stripe of sun that had found a way through the busted roof and the stubborn day. Somewhere beyond the broken wall, the road pried itself out of the mud, and a child laughed, sudden, reckless, the kind of laugh that believes in knees and summer. I gathered the tin, the braid, the photo, and the letters and set them carefully on the counter as if the counter might take attendance. Then I rolled my sleeves. I swept glass into a neat surrender, stacked salvageable plates, opened windows that still had hinges, righted the overturned chair by the stove, and fetched water for the herbs. Every gesture woke a memory and asked for nothing in return. This, I realized, is how we rebuild. Not by erasing ruin, but by arranging it gently so that it remembers it belongs to us. When I finally sat again, afternoon had softened. The walnut tree threw a new shadow across the floor, where the doorway had once offered shade. I took up my grandmother's letter and pressed it flat for the next page. But I didn't read. Not yet. I let the house breathe. I let myself listen the way you listen at a bedside, when you need to know if the sleep is steady. My throat loosened, my jaw unclenched. And in that hush, a hush the storm had wrung from the rafters and left like a gift, I said aloud what I had come to say too late, and now said anyway. I am here. The house, shy again, turned its face away and then back. The wind moved through the herb patch, and the rosemary answered with the clean, stubborn scent of something that survives by refusing to pretend. I folded the letter once and held it close. Tomorrow I would ask Thomas about the papers. I would pry up 2 more boards, just to be sure nothing else stayed buried. I would mend the window with tape until a real repair could be made. I would call the insurance number even if the woman at the other end sounded like she had never met a roof. I would read the rest of the letter when the light was kinder. For now, I boiled water on the old stove, miracle of iron, miracle of habit, and broke the last heel of bread I found in a tin near the back of the pantry. It tasted like the word again. I ate standing at the counter, looking out at the yard we used to call a garden, and for a moment the walls did what they had done when I was small and had scraped both knees at once. They leaned in, shy and proud, and held me without moving. And in a tin near the back of the pantry, it tasted like the word again. It was Thomas who found me still sitting by the stove that morning, the tin open, the letters scattered like fallen feathers around me. He stepped inside carefully, as though the air itself might break. "I thought you might need breakfast," he said, setting a parcel of bread and cheese on the counter. His eyes traveled across the wreckage, the letters, the opened floorboard. "I see she left you the truth." "The beginning of it," I murmured. "I'm still afraid of the end." He nodded slowly, the way people do when words are too fragile to use. Truth never arrives all at once. It knocks until you're ready. When he left, I made tea on the old stove, using her chipped kettle, the house filled with the smell of rust and lemon balm, scents that used to mean safety. I sat at the table, the cup warming my hands, and unfolded the next page of her letter. "If you are reading this, you are older than I was when I first held your mother. There are things I must tell you before this house and my memory finish crumbling together. Listen, Lucia, not as a child listens, waiting for comfort. Listen as a woman listens when the world begins to echo." I closed my eyes. The house did echo. Every gust of wind seemed to repeat her words back to me in smaller, trembling voices. The letter continued. "When your mother was born, the river had frozen solid. I remember holding her near the window, watching the men cross it as though walking on glass. I should have known that nothing that beautiful lasts. Your mother was restless from the start, as if her bones had learned the river's song and wanted to follow it. I tried to hold her still, to teach her contentment, but I mistook fear for care. I could see it clearly. My grandmother's young face in the frost-covered glass, a baby pressed to her chest, snow light bending across both of them, a life beginning, and already the shadow of loss waiting at the door. I turned the page. When the technician came to repair the dam, I had already buried my husband 3 winters earlier. He was kind but tired, and our marriage was built on duty. The technician was from another town. He spoke of cities, of trains, of places where no one remembered your father's mistakes. He looked at me like I was not made of what was left, but of what could still begin. I wanted to hate him for that, and perhaps I did for a while. Her words trembled across the paper, uneven, as though written by a hand fighting itself. He played a guitar. That's how it began, not with hands, but with sound. I told him to stop. He laughed and asked what the tune reminded me of. I said, "Regret." He said, "Then you've been listening wrong." I was foolish enough to listen again. I felt something sharp tighten in my chest, a sympathy too deep for judgment. Love, I realized, was always more dangerous in hindsight. I went outside to breathe. The morning air was clean now, the sky rinsed pale by last night's rain. The walnut tree's broken limb lay across the yard like a wounded arm. I started to cut away the smaller branches with an old hatchet from the shed, my grandmother's rhythm echoing through me, steady, patient, unhurried. When I lifted a thick piece of bark, a family of ants darted out, carrying their home on their backs. Even the smallest creatures here knew what survival meant. By noon I was sweating, covered in sawdust and memory. I sat on the step and opened the letter again. He left before spring. The company recalled him to the city. He promised to return. I told myself I did not believe him. Then I found the letter he had slipped into the cupboard. In it, he asked me to follow him, to bring our daughter when the thaw came. He wrote your mother's name in full, and at the end he signed his own, Marco D. I kept that letter for years, folded small as a sin, until your mother found it and read it. That was the night she called me a coward and left. I felt a tear slide down my cheek before I knew it was there. You came years later after your mother's accident. They sent word to me only after the funeral. You were small and quiet, a shadow of both her and him. When I saw you, I knew the world had given me another chance to choose courage, but I failed again. I could not tell you who your grandfather was, or that your mother had never forgiven me. I told myself I was sparing you the shame. Now I see I was sparing myself the reckoning. The paper trembled in my hands. I could almost hear her voice breaking as she wrote those words, her lifelong apology inked in trembling loops. Afternoon light pooled across the ruined kitchen floor. I picked up the photo of my mother from the tin again. The resemblance was undeniable. Her eyes were my eyes, her defiance my own. But now, knowing what I knew, that defiance looked more like grief disguised as rebellion. I whispered, "So he never knew about me." The house creaked softly in reply. For a moment, I imagined what that man might have looked like. The technician by the river, guitar in hand, laughing in a language that smelled of pine and smoke. Somewhere in his life there might still be a trace of us, a photograph, a name, a song he couldn't finish. When I went back inside, I noticed something I hadn't before. Behind the stove, in a small wooden box nailed to the wall, was a rusted harmonica. It had been there my whole childhood, but I had never once heard my grandmother play it. I picked it up and wiped the dust away. The initials engraved on it, M.D., were faint, but unmistakable. Marco D. The man from the letter. The man who had once played guitar by the frozen river. It was as if he had never left, just changed instruments, and hid his voice inside these walls. I held the harmonica to my lips and blew softly. The sound was thin, shaky, uncertain, but it carried. It filled the room, bouncing off the cracked tiles, curling up into the broken rafters. For a heartbeat, I felt her beside me again. Younger, freer, smiling the way she hadn't in years. Then the moment passed, and all that remained was the echo. That night I slept in her bed. The mattress was stiff, but the scent of lavender still lingered faintly in the sheets. I dreamt of the river freezing over, of two figures standing on opposite banks calling to each other across the ice, their voices lost in the wind. When I woke, dawn was just beginning. The house was silent again, except for the sound of the wind nudging open the front door. It felt almost like an invitation. I folded the letter, pressed it to my lips, and whispered, "I'm listening now." Outside, the first bird of morning began to sing. The morning after I read my grandmother's confession felt like stepping into a version of the world that no longer knew me. The sunlight on the broken tiles looked gentler, almost apologetic, as though even the day had learned how fragile memory could be. I sat at the table with the harmonica beside my teacup and the letters folded neatly before me. They felt heavier now, like they had absorbed the weight of everything she'd never said aloud. For the first time in my life, I understood that silence wasn't emptiness. It was storage. Every pause, every swallowed truth, had been her way of keeping the world from breaking completely. But it broke anyway. I went to see Thomas after breakfast. His small post office sat near the town square, the same building where, as a child, I'd once waited on tiptoe for letters from my mother that never came. The smell of paper and dust hadn't changed. He looked up from his ledger and smiled faintly. "You look more like her every day," he said, and then his face softened when he realized which her he meant. Your grandmother used to sit where you're standing. She'd come every Friday to ask if there was a letter from the city. For years. Was there ever one? I asked. He shook his head. Never. But she came anyway. Sometimes she'd leave a coin on the counter and tell me to keep it for luck. I swallowed hard. She mentioned someone named Marco D in her letter. Said he worked on the dam project. Thomas leaned back in his chair, frowning in thought. Marco D, he murmured. Yes, I remember a man by that name. Quiet, always sketching in a notebook. He boarded at Marta's Inn down by the river for a while. Then one day, gone. Some said he drowned when the bridge collapsed. Others said he left before winter. Depends who you ask. Did he ever send letters? Not here, Thomas said. But I can tell you where Marta's granddaughter lives now. She might remember something. She never threw anything away, that woman. The road to Marta's old inn was narrow and lined with birch trees, their white bark peeling like pages too often opened. The river beside it had shrunk with time, exposing stones that once lived underwater. When I reached the inn, the roof sagged, and the signboard hung crooked, the paint so faded it looked like a ghost of its own name. A young woman answered the door, a granddaughter indeed, with the same gray eyes I remembered from the stories. You're Lucia, she said. I know who you are. Everyone does. I smiled awkwardly. I'm looking for something that might belong to a man named Marco D. He stayed here years ago. She led me to a back room that smelled of cedar and thyme. We kept some of the old guest things in boxes. My grandmother couldn't bring herself to throw them out. Maybe you'll find something. The boxes were full of fragments. Receipts, faded letters, forgotten scarves, half-written postcards. In the third box, beneath a stack of yellowed newspapers, I found it. A leather-bound sketchbook, water-stained and brittle, the initials MD pressed faintly into the cover. I opened it carefully. Inside were drawings of the dam construction site, arches, measurements, scaffolds. But between those precise architectural lines were sketches of faces. One in particular stopped me. A woman's face, my grandmother's face, younger, her eyes bright, her hair pinned back. Beside the drawing, a line written in quick pencil. The sound of her laughter builds more bridges than I ever will. My breath caught. For a long time I could do nothing but trace the shape of her jaw, the gentle tilt of her smile. I hadn't realized until that moment how much love can hide behind blueprints. At the very back of the sketchbook was a single sheet of music paper, notes scribbled unevenly across the staff, a melody half-finished. Title, River's Edge. I closed the book slowly, as though any sudden movement might erase the sound I could almost hear between those lines. When I returned to the village, the sun was setting. I sat on the steps of the ruined house and placed the sketchbook on my knees. The wind picked up, rustling the pages open again. Almost impatient, I smiled through my tears. All right, I whispered. Let's hear it then. I brought the harmonica to my lips and tried to play the notes written on the paper. At first it was clumsy, uneven, broken. But then something shifted. The rhythm found me. The melody curved into the air like a hand reaching back from another lifetime. And in that sound, I heard them both. My grandmother's steady heartbeat and the laughter of the man she'd once loved by the frozen river. Later that night, I lit a small fire in the stove and read the final part of her letter. If you find Marco or the pieces of him left behind, tell him that forgiveness came quietly. Tell him he built more than a dam. He built a place where silence could rest. I closed my eyes. Maybe he was gone, maybe not. Maybe forgiveness didn't need witnesses. It just needed release. The wind outside carried the faint echo of the song. The house, though ruined, seemed to hum along. And I understood then that the past doesn't vanish. It becomes music, played by those who are finally brave enough to listen. The sky was pale when I woke, streaked with silver like a memory trying to return. The storm clouds that had hovered for days were finally gone, leaving behind air so clean it almost hurt to breathe. The ruins of the house glistened with dew, and for the first time since I came back, it didn't look broken, just unfinished, waiting. I lit a small fire in the stove. The crackle of wood filled the quiet like a voice finding courage again. My grandmother's letter sat folded beside me, next to the sketchbook, the harmonica, and the small tin of keepsakes. Everything she had left behind was here. The proof of a life not erased, only paused. When the water boiled, I poured myself a cup of tea and walked outside. The walnut tree stood proud despite its missing branch. The sun touched its bark, and for a moment it looked like it was glowing from within. That was when I realized maybe the house hadn't collapsed to destroy her past. Maybe it had opened so I could finally see inside it. I spent the morning cleaning. I gathered splintered wood, patched the holes in the window with plastic sheets, and swept the corners where dirt had gathered like silence. Every movement was an act of forgiveness. Every nail I hammered felt like an apology finally spoken. When Thomas stopped by, he watched quietly as I worked. "You're staying, then?" he asked. I nodded. "For a while. I want to rebuild it. Not exactly as it was, just enough that it can breathe again." He smiled, a deep, weathered thing. "Your grandmother would like that. She always said the house had a stubborn soul. Seems it runs in the family." He helped me lift the larger beams into place, his hands sure despite the tremor of age. When we finished, he handed me a small envelope. "I found this in the post ledger this morning," he said. "It was never sent. Your grandmother must have given it to me years ago, but I forgot until I saw your name again." The envelope was yellowed, the ink faint but clear. "To Marco D." My heart stopped for a beat. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I sat on the front steps, the letter trembling in my hands, and listened to the wind move through the empty rooms. When I finally unfolded it, the words were short and uneven, written in her final years, the hand of someone who knew time was running out. "Marco, I forgive you for leaving, because I left too. I left our laughter by the river, our music half finished, our daughter carrying the rest. If this reaches you, or whoever reads it, know that the river froze only once in my lifetime, but its sound never stopped. It carried you and her, and now it carries the girl who bears your name in her heartbeat." I read it 3 times before I could move. Each time the words sank deeper, threading themselves into the spaces that had been empty for so long. When I finally folded it back, I looked toward the river beyond the walnut trees, the same river that had once brought him here and taken him away. It was smaller now, gentler, like an old friend too tired to argue. That afternoon, I walked down to its edge. The mud was soft, the water cold. I stood there, letter in hand, and whispered into the breeze, "She forgave you, and I do too." Then I let the letter go. It floated downstream, catching the sunlight like a tiny sail, until it disappeared around the bend. Something loosened inside me then. Not sorrow, but space. Space for what could come next. I spent the following days rebuilding small things. The window frame in the kitchen, the fence that had fallen near the garden. The villagers began to stop by, bringing nails, planks, old jars of preserves. Some came out of kindness, others out of curiosity. But when they left, the silence that remained felt lighter. One evening, as the sky turned the color of apricots, I sat by the stove and took out my grandmother's final letter again. There was one last paragraph I hadn't read, written in shaky ink as if her hand had nearly given out. "If this house still stands, it is because love does not need perfection. It only needs return. When you read this, play the song I never learned. Play it not for me, but for the walls that kept us warm. Let them know we remember." I reached for the harmonica. I took a deep breath. And then I played. The tune was clumsy at first, broken by the sound of my own breathing, but soon the melody found me again. The same one I'd tried to play before. Only this time it felt complete. The notes filled every corner of the house, slipped through the cracks, and rose into the night air. Through the window, I could see the neighbors pause in the lane, listening. Even the walnut tree seemed to lean closer. When the final note faded, I whispered, "We're home." Later that night, before I went to sleep, I wrote my own letter. Not to anyone living, but to her. "Grandma, the house stands. The walls breathe again. The river is calm. And I've learned your kind of silence. The one that doesn't hide, but listens. Thank you for keeping the truth safe long enough for me to find it. I promise I'll fill this place with laughter again. Maybe that's the only way to rebuild anything." I left the letter on the windowsill beside the candle. The flame flickered once, then straightened, as if in approval. When dawn came, the light poured through the patched windows in ribbons of gold. Dust floated in the air, turning every breath into something holy. I stood in the middle of the room and smiled. The house, once collapsed, was now awake again. Not perfect, not new, but alive. The way love is, after forgiveness. And outside, the river went on singing, carrying the echoes of everything we had finally learned to let go.